This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, today we'll discuss about irritable bowel syndrome. Mm, Irritable bowel syndrome is majorly a disease of the colon, which is mainly a functional disorder. We all know colon is divided into ascending colon, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon. What are the main functions of the colon? It stores the fecal matter and it reabsorbs the water. Mainly water absorption will occur in the colon. And it serves as the site of growth of beneficial bacteria and other microorganisms. So here irritable bowel syndrome is not an organic disease, it is mainly a functional disorder. So it mainly affects the colon. What are the common symptoms in irritable bowel syndrome? They are abdominal pain, cramping, bloating sensation, gas, diarrhea, and constipation. So epidemiology, it is not so rare disease. It is seen in almost 25% of the adult population. It can occur in any age group, but most commonly it occurs at 45, around 45 years of age, 35 to 40 years, 50 years. Commonly seen in female. Female to male ratio is around 3:1. So what happens here? Colon will undergo contractions, spasmodic contractions that causes abdominal pain. This is the main pathology. So this is the normal colon and the right side is spastic colon. So what are the causes of irritable bowel syndrome? It may be due to abnormal GI tract movements or change in the CNS communication. There will be brain and gut axis will be there. There will be connection between CNS and gut. If there is a miscommunication, then it will cause IBS. Or other cause may be sensory and motor disorders of the colon, or dietary allergies of food sensitivities, or neurotransmitter imbalance and stress. These are the etiological factors for irritable bowel syndrome. Coming to pathophysiology, it is not very clear, but some mechanisms have been put forward. So it is alteration in the GI motility. What will happen is GI motility will either increase or decrease. There will be irregularity in the motility. Usually when it should be mobile, when we eat food and the food is passed into the colon, then the colon movement should occur. But here it will be very irregular. That is one of the pathophysiological features of IBS. Or it may be visceral hypersensitivity. That means whenever we eat food, when the food reaches the intestine, distance, due to distension, there will be pain. That is hyperalgesia will be there. Visceral hypersensitivity is the reason for pain in irritable bowel syndrome. As I already said, brain gut axis will be there. The communication will be altered. That will cause IBS. And post-infectious. Some of the infections can cause IBS, mainly Campylobacter, Salmonella and all can cause IBS or genetics. So this is the pathophysiology. GI motility abnormalities or brain gut interactions like HPA axis, autonomic dysfunction or bile acid malabsorption, genetic factors like twin studies or serotonin polymorphisms. The other thing is these patients are found to have increased serotonin levels. Serotonin increase will cause diarrhea. So IBS diarrhea type of patients have increased serotonin levels. So genetic factors include serotonin polymorphisms. Psychological factors include anxiety, pain, depression, and somatization. So these are the leaky gut dysbiosis. It was found to be that compared to normal individuals, irritable bowel syndrome patients have increased permeability. So what will happen if there is increased permeability? More nutrients will be left in the intestine. That will cause more water and sodium to be absorbed into the lumen, which will cause diarrhea. So leaky gut dysbiosis is also one of the pathophysiological mechanisms. So you have to remember these main 4 pathophysiological mechanisms: gut motility abnormality, brain gut interaction, bile acid malabsorption, genetic factors, psychological effects, and visceral hypersensitivity. So what happens when there is a dysbiosis, genetic susceptibility, and environmental insults? There will be altered permeability. I said permeability will be increased. There will be inflammatory antigen presentation will increase, and mast cell activation will occur in some patients, which will cause altered enteric and neuronal function, irritable bowel syndrome. So which all patients get IBS? Already we know that patients who have psychiatric manifestations or psychological illness, they are more prone for irritable bowel syndrome. Other features which are associated with irritable bowel syndrome are chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, temporomandibular disorder. These are also associated with developing inflammatory bowel syndrome. So what are the symptoms? The main symptom is abdominal pain after eating food. That is the main symptom. Other symptoms are abdominal distension, bloating sensation, abnormal bowel habits. This is the most consistent sign is abnormal bowel habits. Patient will tell, I'm having constipation for a few weeks, followed by intermittent diarrhea and again constipation. Like that, patient will have altered bowel habits with periods of constipation and diarrhea. It will be alternating. Patient will not complain only diarrhea or only constipation. It will be alternating constipation and diarrhea. But each patient will not have both equal symptoms. They will have either diarrhea dominant or constipation predominant IBS. And they will have sensation of incomplete bowel movement. After after defecation, patient will still feel that the bowel is still not empty, and there will be mucus in the stool. As I already said, there are 3 types of IBS. It can be constipation predominant, diarrhea predominant, or mixed. So all are equally prevalent, 33% each. So constipation predominant means patient will complain of alternative constipation with in between normal stools they will have. Symptoms of abdominal cramping or aching are commonly triggered by eating. Whenever patient eats, have food, they will complain abdominal pain, and they feel like they want to empty the bowel, but patient will have constipation. Whereas diarrhea predominant patients will have first thing in the morning or after eating, they will feel like diarrhea, which is urgent. They will have sense of urgency. And the third type of patients will have mixed diarrhea and constipation, which will alternate. IBS constipation is food moves very slowly. The contractions are very irregular, and patient will not, the fecal matter will not pass normally. So food will move very slowly, and they will have constipation, and hard stools are formed. Whereas IBS diarrhea, the contractions are very rapid, which cause food movement to be very quick and causes watery stools. So how do we diagnose irritable bowel syndrome? It is mainly diagnosis of clinical suspicion. Whenever you suspect a patient to have IBS, you have to think clinically. For that, they developed the Rome criteria. Currently, it is Rome 4 criteria, which is updated criteria. If a patient satisfies this criteria, then you will call them to have irritable bowel syndrome. So basically, it is a diagnosis of clinical suspicion. No laboratory thing can confirm the diagnosis of IBS. If you feel the patient is having IBS and they fit into the Rome criteria, then you will call it as IBS. So what is the most important thing? The patient should have abdominal pain and discomfort for at least 3 months, 12 weeks. So it is at least for 3 months, patient should have pain, abdominal pain for at least once in a week. Even if the patient is telling I'm having pain for 3 months, you should ask whether the patient is having pain, how frequently. It should be at least once in a week. Then only they will fit into the diagnosis of IBS. So along with that, more than 2 of the following criteria should be there. So this is the complete Rome 4 diagnostic criteria. Patient will have recurrent abdominal pain on an average at least 1 day per week in the last 3 months associated with more than 2 of the following 3 criteria. What are the 3 criteria? The defecation should be associated with pain. The pain which he is complaining is related to the defecation. Whenever he is passing stool, they will tell pain is getting relieved. Associated with change in the frequency of stool. Whenever there is abdominal pain, patient will complain of change in the frequency of stool. And the third thing is it is associated with change in the appearance of the stool. Patient will complain, I'm having abdominal pain today and my stools are very hard. Or he will tell, I'm having diarrhea today. So if there is abdominal pain for at least 1 day per week for 3 months and either 2 of the 3 criteria, then he will fit into the diagnostic criteria of irritable bowel syndrome. You have to remember Rome 4 criteria. Some of the symptoms are not included in the criteria, but they will help in the supportive diagnosis. What are the supportive symptoms? They are like defecation straining. The patient will have straining while passing stools, and they will have urgency or feeling of incomplete bowel movement and passing mucus. Mostly patient will complain that along with stool there is a lot of mucus, and they will have bloating sensation. These 4 symptoms will tell us that it is towards the diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome. Though they are not included in the diagnostic criteria, but they will help us in diagnosing irritable bowel syndrome. So what are the features that argue against irritable bowel syndrome? That is presence of anemia. Presence of anemia signifies some inflammatory disorder like IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, or elevated ESR. They are all markers of inflammation. And presence of leukocytes or blood in the stool. And the stool volume will be usually in irritable bowel syndrome, stool volume will be very less. Even though they have diarrhea, it is less. Volume will be less than 200 ml. If the stool volume is more than 200 or 300 ml, then you have to think alternative diagnosis other than irritable bowel syndrome. So presence of anemia, raised ESR, or presence of leukocytes or blood in the stool, and stool volume more than 200 to 300 ml is the diagnosis. We have to think of alternative diagnosis. What are the other tests you can do? These tests are not mandatory, but in some patients you have to do these laboratory investigations. When will you do this? The patient is very old or the disease severity is very high. Whenever the patient is very old, the diagnosis you have to exclude some malignancies or irritable inflammatory bowel syndrome. Then you have to go ahead with the sigmoidoscopy and biopsy. That will tell us we can rule out the inflammatory disorders. If you have strong suspicion against irritable bowel syndrome, then only you have to do sigmoidoscopy. For all IBS patients, you need not do these investigations. Or you can do CT scan. CT scan, what alternative diagnosis we can find. If there is any lymphoma or any tuberculosis, we can find the lymph nodes. Colonoscopy, like I said, like sigmoidoscopy only. If we have any doubts, we have to do colonoscopy and biopsy. The other thing is these patients are found to have more lactose intolerance. So other DDs, these are all tests to rule out the other differential diagnosis. So patients who have lactose intolerance, they will also present like irritable bowel syndrome. So what should we do? We have to do lactase hydrogen breath test. If the breath test is positive, they are more likely to be due to lactose intolerance rather than irritable bowel syndrome. So how do we treat Basically, when do you suspect IBS? A female around 35 to 45 years who comes with history of psychological symptoms and alternative diarrhea and constipation and associated with abdominal pain for 3 months, then you suspect irritable bowel syndromes. Then you have to categorize whether it is predominantly diarrhea or predominantly constipation or mixed type of IBS. Then only we can go ahead with the treatment. So treatment involves dietary modification, drug treatment and psychosocial interventions. So these three are the major components of the treatment in irritable bowel syndrome. So what dietary modification you can give? You have to find out from history that which food items can cause the triggering of the symptoms. So you have to find out the triggers and you have to ask the patient to avoid mainly the foods which have been triggering the symptoms like lentils, legumes and beans in some patients. The main important thing is low FODMAP diet. What is FODMAP? This is burning topic now. What is FODMAP? Fermentable oligo, di and monosaccharides and polyols. These are all fermentable sugars. Whenever there are fermentable oligo, di, monosaccharides and polyols, what will happen? The gut microbiota will alter. Usually we will have what microbia will have? Bifidobacterium and lactobacillus predominantly found in the gut. Those are the good bacteria. It is found that whenever these irritable bowel syndrome patients, the microbiota that is predominantly seen is not the bifidobacterium and lactobacillus level decrease in this irritable bowel syndrome. So these are the FODMAP. They are short chain carbohydrates that are poorly absorbed in the small intestine. Whenever they are poorly absorbed, they will be available for fermentation. Whenever these carbohydrates are fermented, they will have more gas formation and bloating sensation. So we have to avoid the low FODMAP diets. We have avoid the FODMAP diet. We have to give low FODMAP diet, and fiber supplementation should be increased. We have to start with low doses of fiber, and our target dose should be around 20 to 30 grams of fiber per day. You need not give directly 30 grams per day. You have to start with around 5 grams per day, then increase to 7.5, 10, like that. You have to increase the dose very slowly, and final target should be 20 to 30 grams of fiber per day. So why we are giving low FODMAP diet? Because whenever there are small poorly absorbed carbohydrates, there will be laxative effect. And the other thing is, whenever there are carbohydrates in the lumen, due to osmosis, water will come into the lumen, which will cause increased water in the intestine. And the other thing is, the food source for bacteria is plentifully available. Then the patient will have increased gas production, and there will be bloating, abdominal discomfort, flatulence and diarrhea. So FODMAPs will cause all this pathophysiology. So avoid the FODMAPs and give low FODMAP diet. The other thing is, what is the difference between prebiotic and probiotic? Anyone know? Can someone answer what is prebiotic, what is probiotic? Someone answer. Prebiotics are something, if we give, then the intestinal bacterial growth will occur, like bifidobacterium and lactobacillus growth will occur. They are not directly the bacteria, whereas probiotics are like Sporolac. We have, if we ingest that, that capsule contains directly bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, whereas prebiotics are some nutrients which will increase the growth of probiotics in the intestine. So they tried all these drugs in patient. This low FODMAP diet in trials showed that improved symptomatically patients are improving with low FODMAP diet, whereas with probiotics there is no significant difference. And if the patients are given with prebiotics, some 5 trials were done. One trial showed positive result, and all other 4 trials showed that patient is having increased diarrhea with the use of prebiotics. So prebiotics and probiotics have no role in treatment of IBS. So main treatment is low FODMAP diet, and some antibiotics are found to be efficient in IBS. The only antibiotic that is proven to be effective in irritable bowel syndrome is rifaximin. That is important. So these are some common food sources of FODMAPs. So in fruits like apple, cherry, mango, pear, watermelon contains free fructose, and peach, watermelon. So these all foods should be avoided in patients having irritable bowel syndrome. Coming to vegetables like beetroot, chicory, fennel, garlic, onion, peas should be avoided in patients with irritable bowel syndrome. Wheat, rye, and barley should be avoided. Milk and milk products. Some patients will have lactose intolerance. In those patients, we have to avoid milk and milk products. If they are legume intolerant, we have to avoid the legumes, lentils, and chickpeas. So what are the coming to pharmacological therapies? Patient is having severe pain, we have to give antispasmodics. What are the antispasmodics? Dicyclomine, hyoscine, mebivarin, and pinavarium. So these are the commonly used antispasmodics. The other group of drugs which can be used in irritable bowel syndrome is tricyclic antidepressants like imipramine, amitriptyline, nortriptyline. These drugs will cause decreased symptoms in the irritable bowel syndrome because patients are having associated psychological symptoms most commonly seen with irritable bowel syndrome. The other group of drugs which can be used are SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like fluoxetine, sertraline, citalopram, paroxetine, and all. Other thing is probiotics. So based on the type of the irritable bowel syndrome, we have to give either treatment for constipation or diarrhea. If the patient is having constipation predominant, we have to give laxatives like psyllium or chloride channel activators like lubiprostone. What will happen if you give laxatives? When the patient is having constipation, if you give laxative, what will happen? It will cause more absorption of water into the lumen, and they will have free passage of the stools. The other thing is chloride channel activators like lubiprostone. It will cause activation of the chloride channels and more pumping of sodium chloride into the lumen, and further water will come into the lumen and they will have free passage of stools. And the other drugs are serotonin agonists. Serotonin 5-HT4 agonists like tigacerod, mosapride have been tried in constipation predominant IBS, but tigacerod is now banned from India due to development of cardiac risk factors like CHF, myocardial infarction, and all. It is causing cardiovascular disorders. That's why tigacerod is now not being used. So other thing is guanyl cyclase C agonist. What will happen? Linaclotide. Linaclotide is a guanyl cyclase agonist, which will increase the levels of cyclic GMP, and more water will be absorbed into the intestine. So out of this, tigacerod is now not being used due to development of cardiovascular diseases. And if the patient is a diarrhea predominant irritable bowel syndrome, then you have to give antibiotics, mainly rifaximin, or anti-motility agents like loperamide. Loperamide 2 to 4 mg you can give every 3 hourly. You can give maximum dose is 12 mg per day, or difenoxylate, or serotonin antagonist, 5-HT3 antagonist like alocetrone. Alocetrone also previously used commonly in irritable bowel syndrome, but nowadays it is not used because of development of ischemic colitis. Because the patient are developing ischemic colitis, Alocetrone has been banned for the use. Now it is again reintroduced into the market, but we have to explain to the patient that he may develop ischemic colitis. If the patient gives written consent that he is agreeing for the risk, then only you have to give alocetrone. But mostly nowadays we are not using alocetrone. So this is the summary of the drugs used in IBD. If that is diarrhea, loperamide 2 to 4 mg. When necessary, maximum I told 12 gram per day. Cholestyramine resins can be given 4 gram with meals. Alocetrone only available in US. Other countries it is banned due to development of ischemic colitis. It is reserved for the use in severe irritable bowel syndrome. So constipation, I have to give psyllium, methyl cellulose or lactulose syrup, polyethylene glycol, lubiprostone, which is chloride channel activator. Linaclotide is guanyl cyclase agonist. Magnesium hydroxide. These all drugs can be tried in IBS constipation type. For abdominal pain, we have to give anti-spasmodics or tricyclic antidepressants or SSRIs. If the patient is complaining gas and bloating sensation, you have to advise them to take low FODMAP diet, probiotics, and rifaximin. This is the summary of pharmacological therapy in irritable bowel syndrome. So again the same thing. So antispasmodics are for short-term relief and abdominal pain, but they can also be used to treat diarrhea in patients with IBS diarrhea. What are the antispasmodics we use? Dicyclomine or hyoscine or clidinium. These are the antispasmodics. Tricyclic antidepressants are amitriptyline, imipramine, nortriptyline. So amitriptyline is found to have beneficial effect irrespective of its effect on depression. Not only it is useful for depression, but also irrespective of the depression effect on depression, it is having beneficial effects in irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. It reduces the symptoms. So the other group of drugs are SSRIs, mainly fluoxetine, sertraline, citalopram, escitalopram. Most commonly we use citalopram and paroxetine. Probiotics, I told, trials did not show any improvement in symptoms, but we can try if you want. For constipation, Laxative is commonly, psyllium have best evidence here. Other PEG and all can be used. Lubiprostone. Tegaserod, you have to remember it is removed from the market due to high risk of heart attack or stroke. What is the problem I told with alocetrone? It is ischemic colitis. Antibiotic, as I told, short course of rifaximin should be given, 550 mg BD. That is useful in IBS diarrhea. Thank you.